among the many versions of Windows, Windows 8.1 is probably one of the most polarizing. Featuring a start screen as opposed to the traditional start menu, it was something that received mixed reviews at the time, although not as much as its predecessor, and something that you either love or hate. But those who often used Windows 8.1 are more likely to not view it as an absolute piece of garbage compared to Windows 11. But how usable is Windows 8.1 in 2026? What games can we play on it? And can you browse the web on it or anything? Those are some great questions, so let's get started. Okay, well, there is something I real briefly need to bring up first before I get started. Windows 8.1 is not to be confused with Windows 8, which got even more mixed reviews and stuff and was released the year prior. Windows 8.1 piggybacks on a lot of Windows 8 branding, and so it's important to acknowledge the differences. So, for some background, in the 80s, Bill Gates set out a vision for the future of Windows. Okay, well, probably closer to the 90s, but I have a point. His vision was that there would be a computer on every desk in every home running Windows. And by Windows 7, that had largely been achieved to the legal extent. And so in the early 2010s, Microsoft leadership decided it was time to start expanding beyond Windows on computers. And so they opted to design a user interface and OS that would revolve a lot more around ideas that were quite popular among investors at the time, like touchscreen UIs and ecosystems. Over the next 3 years after Windows 7's release, Microsoft would develop Windows 8 in an insanely fast cycle. As an additional note, you can really see a lot of the changes in real time with Windows 8 as opposed to other builds or other versions of Windows, because a lot of builds of it have leaked, over 200 to be exact, but regardless, Windows 8 would release to the public in August of 2012, and reviews were mixed, with Lloyd Case of PC World saying that it was mainly only worthwhile if you needed good mobile integration, and that it wasn't that good compared to Windows 7, and Seth Rosenblatt saying that while it did take number 2 in the tablet OS field, its UI overhauls would create a steep learning curve for anyone. A lot of people did not like Windows 8, with, according to Tim Anderson of The Register, saying that the problem is that the modern UI, which via the start screen Microsoft forces on users whether or not they have tablets, is disorientating while offering little benefit over the old classic Windows user interface for desktop use. Needless to say, Microsoft got to work quite quickly on an update that would fix a lot of these issues, which was Windows 8.1 and released the following year in 2013. Reviews of Windows 8.1 were a lot more lukewarm and positive. There was still a couple folks who thought it was not the best, but Tim Anderson of The Register said that it was a worthwhile upgrade over Windows 7. That being said, PC World said that Windows 8.1 didn't have all the features they really would have liked. Windows 8.1 got 2 updates that brought some significant changes to it, and it was supposed to get a third that would completely gut the start screen, if I remember correctly, in favor of a more putting Metro apps on the desktop. However, this third update would basically evolve into Windows 10, which released in 2015. Support for Windows 8.0 was dropped in 2016, making it a relatively short-lived version of Windows, while Windows 8.1 got a lot more support, with support being dropped for it in January of 2023. Anyway, I think we should look at the computer we're going to be using for this, and that would be the HP Pavilion 500A60. My main Windows 8.1 PC, and for a while the only one I've had 8.1 installed on until recently. This thing has an AMD A6 5200 APU at 2 GHz, 8 GB of DDR3 RAM, a 1 TB Western Digital hard drive, and an ATI Radeon 8400, which is integrated into the CPU, I think, or a dedicated integrated graphics thing. It is by no means a good system, but it is good enough for the job. So I think with that, I do need to bring up something real briefly first, in that there aren't many programs that support only 8.1 at the minimum. Usually it's Windows 7 or earlier. And so this video will be a semi-expansion of my Windows 7 in 2026 video. Suffice to say, there will be a couple programs that do ask for at least 8.1. And you know what? I'm going to start with a Windows 8.1 minimum requirement program. VRoid Studio asks for at least Windows 8 or 8.1. This is a program that is intended for editing VRoid models, which are often used as VRChat avatars, VTuber models, or my typical use case. That being said, it does not run very well here. This is definitely down to the fact that I'm using a relatively mediocre Windows 8.1 PC, and I think it'd be somewhat better if I was using my Haswell 8.1 desktop. But alas, I'm a bit picky, so no. The model I'm using here is a depiction of the Windows 2000 OS ton that I made. Probably quite a proud work of mine, and so yeah, but even though it has short hair, it does not help Vroid Studio in this case. Another program that didn't really run that well was Krita. Now it should be said that this program also asks for at least 8.1. But it does work, as long as you've either got a good enough PC or are willing to put up with painstakingly slow load times and something that may be a tad on the laggy side. VMware Workstation Player also dropped support for Windows 7, but not 8.1 for a time. Now, VMware Player has been superseded by the normal VMware Workstation Pro for free use, as long as you're willing to go through all of Broadcom's hurdles, but I can't be 100% sure if that will work on Windows 8.1 anymore. And judging by support models, I don't think it does. I've used this program on this PC to get footage for B-roll and actually main footage for videos when I need something that I need to run in a VM, as evident by the fact that this thing has my Windows Home Server 2011 B-roll VM, as well as my entire VM for Windows Embedded POS Ready 2009. And so that does mean that I have a leftover Windows XP VM from when I realized that Windows Embedded Standard 2009 is not very easy to install. In terms of an office suite, the last version of LibreOffice to support Windows 8.1 is, if I remember correctly, 25.2. I had this installed on here from when I tried daily driving Windows 8.1 for a week. And another thing I know works because it keeps nagging me here is Avast antivirus. Not too much of a surprise given that there's a version of AVG, which is very similar to Avast these days, that will work on Windows Vista and XP. That being said, antivirus stuff is more of a use it if you want to, but you're likely going to experience a lot of slowdowns. In terms of things that work on both 8.1 and Windows 7, FooBar it is not working. What about OpenMPT? So I thought that FooBar 2000 was not working correctly, but in reality, the problem here is that this Windows 8.1 install is going through all sorts of weird stuff, and the latest in its shenanigans is turning off all of the audio at random unless you unplug and plug back in the headphone or speaker jack. As such, it should be said that FooBar 2000 does actually work on Windows 8.1, no problem at all. I just have a weird install disk that came from Microslop of all folks. OpenMPT is another thing that will work. Designed to be a jack of all trades of a tracker program, it can play old mod things, which is quite useful here. And now let's look at web browsing. Obviously you've got Supermia, but there are other browsers that exist, such as various forks of Firefox, as well as Kmelian. I'm not going to go into detail on Kmelian or the Firefox programs, but to put it simply, Supermia will work flawlessly. Obviously my site will load almost perfectly fine, and any sort of issues here is just because of my laptop, and you can navigate it flawlessly. YouTube will also play, both on the site. The YouTube playback is basically okay on an older system like this. In fact, and embedded into another web page. However, when it gets to 1080p on this computer, it starts to struggle. Not in the socket T way, but in the it will keep buffering way. And to make matters worse, on the embedded thing, it will bring up all the on-screen display. Brilliant. Obviously, at this point, I should say that any sort of website you throw at this thing should likely be able to work. And I mean, after all, I did use this version of Windows for a week last year at around this time, and so let's play some games. Now, when it comes to Steam support, you're kinda out of luck, because while there's a copy of the Steam client that will work on Windows 7 that's been archived, that copy does not work on Windows 8.1. Don't try it, I've tested it myself, it just has issues trying to load Steam Web Helper. But that doesn't mean that nothing will work on Windows 8.1. Minecraft Launcher, while not getting new updates for Windows 8.1 and 7, does actually still work on these versions of Windows, despite what I said in my Windows 7 and 2026 video. And yeah, we can play Minecraft. Granted, I'm using version 1.8 here because I don't want to see a PowerPoint slideshow here. And I'm pretty sure that's what would happen, if not worse, on this PC. And 1.8 is fairly playable on here. I'm not saying that newer versions won't work, it's all just down to my relatively mediocre hardware here. I of course need to bring up that you need a Microslop account and Xbox in order to play the game, but that's kind of to be expected when your game is tethered to Microslop in any sort of way. I'm anticipating that with Forza Horizon 6 coming out and me being able to play it today, even though I'm using a Steam Steam Deck. And next up, we've got Histocom. I know this would be a lot more fitting in Windows 7, but I grew up playing Histocom on Windows 8.1 on my ePC descendant. Hopefully I can make a video about that someday. And so I often look at it in these videos. It's similar in design to Progress Bar 95, but is fundamentally a lot different and is not a premise of just a casual game. It was intended to be a story mode, Windows tech-themed time travel adventure. At least it was, because development never really got finished on it, which is honestly kind of a shame. You'd expect there to be a complete development when there's Windows Vista at the end, but it's not my game, it never was, so only if I ever have the audacity to remake somebody else's IP. And to finish things off, another indie game, Touhou 14. Touhou 14 is fairly simple, and I've already looked at it in my ThinkCenter M73 video, but for those unaware, this was the first version available to the Western world, and it's your typical Touhou game. This time, I didn't get as far into the game, because yeah, but again, I think as I said in that video, I'll probably just practice playing this game a bit more. And so that's that. So to conclude, Windows 8.1 is still very much usable in 2026. It has more recent security updates available to all compared to Windows 7. There's a decent range of software that still supports it, not to mention just look at every previous entry in this series, and all that stuff will likely work on 8.1 too. And even though it doesn't have Steam support and the PC I'm using on it here is junk, that doesn't mean that every PC running 8.1 is a piece of garbage, and that doesn't mean that every game is not going to be playable on Windows 8.1. In fact, even into Windows 7's days, EA was still using their own sorts of distribution methods for games, and while things can change drastically in a 3-year time span, I wouldn't be surprised if there were at least quite a few holdouts, besides the games we looked at today, that can run on 8.1. Now as to if you should use it, your choice. And that basically concludes the Windows in 2026 series. One brief thing I want to bring up real briefly, in that, although I alluded to potentially continuing the series in 2027, I might either take an annual hiatus, or I might just stop doing these altogether, because I'm honestly losing the motivation to really do these. For context, I just now completed this in mid-May, and I've been on and off with these things since January. I'm definitely going to put a lot of thinking into if I should continue making these, because while they do well, I'm not having fun with them as much anymore, and I'm pretty sure I'm the only content creator to consistently do these every year. But anyway, what's your thoughts? Should I keep doing these? Do you think Windows 8.1 is still usable in 2026? Do you still use Windows 8.1? If so, what's your thoughts on it? Did you experience Windows 8.1 back in the day? I know I did, and I actually didn't have that bad of an experience with it. Would you like to see more of this kinds of Windows 8.1 stuff? And did you enjoy this video? Or is there something I could do to improve my content, or something I forgot to address? If you have anything to say, feel free to let me know down below in the comment section, through my email, or through my Discord server, and feel free to give this video a like. But that's going to be it for this week, so thanks for watching and have a nice day.